Why don't we start? And this should be fun. I will ask everybody to go very quickly so that we can get as much done as possible. And the question, keep your cards and letters coming. Emmanuel. Dr. Wobon published a very important paper about vitamin D this year. And one question for Emmanuel, does vitamin D play a role in the suppression of MS? What is its importance?
So there was a notion that vitamin D might be involved in the risk to develop MS one day in a lifetime. But there was a question that was unanswered about once you have MS, is vitamin D important? And we were the first to actually report that vitamin D levels seem to be very important. If you have low vitamin D levels, you have a higher risk to have subsequently relapses of MS. And this is something that we initially did in pediatric MS patients, but this has been since then reproduced by another group in Australia that has done the same type of analysis in adults. And there's a very strong correlation between low level of vitamin D and the increase in the risk of relapses. So the results were trying to get funding to do a study of supplementation with vitamin D. But we also encourage patients to have their vitamin D levels measured and under medical supervision to see how to adjust their vitamin D levels to right smack in the middle of the normal range. I would not suggest everybody goes on a major load of vitamin D because that's one vitamin that can have dangerous side effects if you take it too much too long, and medical supervision is important.
David?
Yes.
Can I ask you a question that several people have asked? How did you turn your MS around?
I think it's important to note, again, that each and every person with multiple sclerosis is affected very, very differently. In my case, when I was first diagnosed, it actually took quite a while before I received the official diagnosis. The first thing I was diagnosed with, finally, was a mosquito bite. I got bit by a mosquito and got the West Nile virus. And they believed, the theory was, and there's no way to truly know, but they believed that virus took such a toll on my system that it somehow triggered the autoimmune reaction of multiple sclerosis. And my official diagnosis came once I was in a wheelchair, unable to walk, unable to do anything for myself, hardly able to see or even move my hands. They put me on a steroid blast, they called it, of Solumedrol, 5 days, 1,000 milligrams a day. And it definitely helped in the sense that it took the inflammation on my central nervous system down. So all of a sudden those signals are getting through a little bit better. I was able to get out of the wheelchair and shuffle with the cane for some period of time, maybe about a month and a half. Now during that time, I did a complete transformation, reformation of everything about my lifestyle. From the basic ABCs of dietary intake, I did go on a very aggressive diet and tried to do everything I could naturally to detox my body. Cut out all animal protein, ate as much as I could raw foods that were not cooked under 118 degrees, no dairy, no refined sugars, and no gluten. And I did that aggressively and still try to do that as best I can. After a month and a half of the steroid, it wore off and the inflammation came back and I went back into a wheelchair. Funny enough, 6 months later, I was getting married and told my neurologist, you know, that steroid works pretty good. I'd like to walk on my wedding day. It'd be a novel idea. And it's not a long-term therapy where I would do that kind of a steroid blast consistently, and I knew that. But she consented to do another steroid blast before my wedding. I got out of my wheelchair, and I've been walking since that day. And that was 3 years ago. Since that day, I have tried to take the approach along the lines of Nancy and do a little bit more of a natural approach. I was approached to do several different drugs, the Avenetry, the Copaxone, but in particular, Tysabri was the one they were looking at for me. And I had to weigh out the options in my mind first with my wife and be able to decide what route we want to take. And we decided, for me, that I would go and try the natural approach first and see how I do. And so far, after 3 years of continuing to do well, at least staying on my feet, I feel it's doing the best for me right now. I do live with chronic pain, so to speak. It's a constant crushing all over my body, 24/7. It's been 4.5 years of that. In my mind, I can live with that because you know I drove a car this morning. That was pretty cool. I try to, as best I can, shift my attitude and find that that can really make a world of difference. Now, whether or not I end up having some kind of a relapse, I don't like to think or believe that I will. But if I do, I know that there's other things that I can try. But I decided to start with the bottom line, natural approach, the least amount of possible side effects, and felt good about that. And so far, so good for me. I believe that that's been a very good thing. Again, case-by-case scenario, but it's definitely changed my life in the way that I look at my intake and the way I live my life. So.
For Dr. Weiner, Dr. Les Weiner, could you comment on the stem cell transplant work that is being done at Northwestern and other places?
Yes. I might tell you that what this is autologous, which means it comes from the patient. The concept is that if you obliterate the current immune response of the patient in this immunologic disease and give him back cells that are essentially stem cells, that patient will now reprogram their system so that they will not have any pathologic cells, any disease-producing cells. So this is being tested in Europe, it's being tested at Northwestern. There are about 4 or 5 places in the US that are doing controlled trials. And also there's an entire consortium of study being done in Canada. Let me just say this, that it requires a significant amount of immunosuppression. Now, because of the fact that you're using your own cells, you don't have the rejection issue. So therefore, there have not been any deaths because of the fact that the immunosuppression, although severe, makes people sick. Chemotherapeutic agents are used. People recover from that. And in that period, you get your own cells back, which means you're protected. Now, there are 2 things that we see happening, and these trials are not complete. One of them is that they're using very early patients, which is always kind of suspicious in the fact that we know a lot of things work in the very early patients. The second is that the immunosuppression is severe enough and consistent enough that you really would perhaps get the same result if you just immunosuppress people and you put them in some kind of bubble so they didn't get infection. The third is, so far, there's very little evidence that these cells are getting into the nervous system. So what has to be proven with this study is that there is regeneration. Have they been able to induce our own cells to repair? And those are techniques that are a little bit difficult, but they're evolving. So the question is that I think that this should only be done in a clinical trial setting, which is, by the way, Northwestern is doing. And so is a group in Seattle. But I think going to Costa Rica is not a good thing to do to get stem cells.